Welcome to this episode of the Global Governance Program video series on rules of origin. Today we are pleased to have with us Mr. Pier Paolo Ghetti, who is partner at Deloitte. So, Mr. Ghetti, could you first tell us a little bit more about you and how your work relates to rules of origin?
Yeah, sure. I've been, let's say, assisting traders, exporters and importers in the last 15 years in the intricacies of global trade, which means assisting them in the processes of moving goods from across the borders. And of course, the rules of origin play an important role in this. Why? Because now you have an increased complexity in the supply chain and also in the value chain. So it's more and more difficult to define which is the country conferring the origin of the product. And maybe another reason is that rules of origin have been created when the industrial system was completely different. And so now it's not easy at all for companies to understand how to apply those rules of origin to the new industrial processes. Think about the 3D printing, it's very, very different from the past.
So rules are old.
Well, you can put it like this, but I mean, we need a new interpretation of rules of origin to make it there more up to date.
Yeah, could you tell us maybe with more details on why rules of origin are important for the private sector, how it matters from a business perspective?
Yeah, to put it very, very simple, rules of origin have an impact on duties. If you look at preferential origin, the impact on duties is basically the reduction of duties granted by the free trade agreement, while for non-preferential origin rules, you can have additional duties based on trade measures, anti-dumping duties and similar things. So rules of origin have an impact on duty. Duty has an impact on margin, and therefore it is important for companies to understand, to apply, and to benefit of everything that is connected to these rules of origin, and reduce as much as possible the impact on duties along the supply chain. This is the real reason why rules of origin are important.
Could you give us maybe a specific example about what you have in mind?
Yeah, sure. Let's say that you are an Italian company in the fashion industry, so classic, and you want to export your goods to Japan. We have a new free trade agreement between the EU and Japan. And when the goods reach the border in Japan, you can either have a taxation of 10%, which is the normal duty rate, the so-called MFN, sovereign nation duty rate. But if you are able to claim the preferential origin, then that duty rate goes to 0%. So it's about money, it's about margins, and it's about margins in the chain. So maybe it's not about you gaining that margin, but it's about your client or your subsidiary in Japan gaining that cost reduction. Let's put it like this.
So now to comply with those rules, as we already mentioned, some cost may be incurred by the private sectors. Economists estimate those to be within a range between 6-12%, and actually it means that if the preference margin is low, so precisely what you were talking about before, this difference between the normal tariff and the reduced one. So if this is low, then it may be the case that firms may not have incentives to make much of efforts to comply with the rule, which could explain low utilization rates of trade preferences. And so, what is your experience with this regards? Is that really the case that the preference margin, when it's low, then businesses, companies will not try to comply with the rule, or what's your views on that?
I mean, my approach is very empirical on this. So essentially there is, as you were saying, more or less a trade-off between the duty preference and the compliance costs related to the origin management, let's put it like this. So you have, as a company, to implement processes to get this preference, and these processes have a cost, and the cost is cross-functional. It is across different functions in the company. You have the purchasing department that needs to collect declaration from supplier. You have the production department that needs to understand and apply correctly the rule of origin on the bill of material of the products. You have the sales department. You have the logistics that need to apply for certificate of origin, and this has impact, of course, also on the transit time of goods. So these are the compliance costs. And there is another thing which is very important, and it's sometimes underestimated, which is lower flexibility that the company has when it needs to comply with the rules of origin. Example given, if the rule of origin states that the raw materials need to be sourced locally, then the purchasing department doesn't have the flexibility to source raw materials from different countries. And this might have an impact on availability of products, but also on the overall cost of the goods. Okay, so this is another important point which sometimes is underestimated.
Thank you. So yes, this latter point is related to the compliance with some specific rules of origin, product-specific rules of origin criteria, such as, you know, having a certain percentage of non-originating material or change of tariff classification. So these are related to the stringency of the rules, and you have various components in rules of origin. An additional one is when we talk about administrative costs. So not only the fact that you have to comply with the rule, but also you have administrative costs. And so I was wondering which component in the rules of origin is actually affecting the firm the most. I mean, what is the most costly factors for firms, for companies?
This is a very tough question, and there's not a single answer, honestly. As I was saying before, there are costs that are distributed along different functions. To me, but this is my very personal view, the cost of collecting information about origin from all the suppliers is maybe the most impacting one. So think about a company having thousands of suppliers, and they need to go to the supplier and ask for all the information that are needed to apply the rule of origin. But then you also have the administrative cost, of course, and the cost of certification, and the time to issue certificates of origin, because one day for issuing a certificate of origin is 1 day of transit time, is 1 day less in terms of time to market. And in FMCG, in fast-moving consumer goods, this can be a challenge.
Rules of origin are used obviously in free trade agreements, and we all know that now we have more and more free trade agreements. You have a proliferation of free trade agreements. So yeah, negotiators are busy negotiating that, and it seems to be, not much of efforts to harmonize the rules across all these agreements. So you have different set of rules for different agreements, and so this adds to the complexity of the rules of origin. So are you in touch with trade negotiators? Are you involved in those negotiators? Do you talk to them? Do they call you to have insights from the private sector?
There is a disconnect, honestly, between the private sector and the negotiators. Some industries make their voice heard at the negotiator level, but sometimes they don't have a clear view on what they really want from the negotiation. I see sometimes the rules of origin that are very strict and that say, for example, that all the main raw materials used need to be sourced locally, and this was a request by the industry to have this strict rule of origin, and then they have to apply the rule of origin, and they understand that it's too strict for them. They don't have the raw materials available, and this is something really frustrating for them and for us as advisors, of course. Then you were mentioning another big important point, which is the variability, the variety of rules of origin in different agreements. This is something very difficult to implement in an origin management system, because then you have to change, to tweak the calculation of origin depending on the destination of the goods, and this is a huge impact on processes.
Mr. Ghetti, as part of this UI UNCTAD program on rules of origin, you kindly accepted not only to be here today, but you also accepted to present your views next week at a workshop at the World Customs Organization, a workshop on the updating of the Annex K of the revised Kyoto Convention. So the Annex K is the Annex on Rules of Origin. What do you expect from this participation? Is the private sector willing to advocate the case for plurilateral negotiations, for example, on rules of origin?
I think so. I think the time has come for this new approach from the private sector, and the real issue from their point of view is that they need clarity on the definitions. Example given again, simple assembly is not origin conferring, which is the limit of simple assembly. When we move outside simple assembly, and it's an industrial assembly which is origin conferring, it's not only about what we put in the rule of origin, but it's also about the general definition that we give and that apply on all the table of rules of origin. So this, in my view, is maybe the most important thing that when the Annex K will be revised, needs to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghetti, for taking the time to answer our questions. It was very interesting. In the next episode, you will find out what happened at the World Customs Organization meeting in Brussels, which is part of the Technical Committee on Rules of Origin.